Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Herbs. Most people begin to have a fascination with herbs when it comes to healing. Maybe they even want to find a way that they can have useful ways of using herbs when it comes to maybe creating better energy, vitality, and lifestyle. On the Beyond 50 radio program today, we've got a special guest who shares that whether foraging or gardening, medicine making or cooking dinner, engaging in the magic and medicine of plants that are growing close to you is a great way to get closer to home, increase your vitality, and sense of belonging in an amazing multiverse. The lives and stories of the plants around us is as remarkable and fantastic as the stories each one of us carries on our long journeys. Weaving two together is a powerful medicine for our times. She's going to be joining us here where she spins yarns and catches a story, a weaver of heart and a soul of the wise woman tradition. Eagle Song is a seasoned generative gardener and community-centered herbalist. In an ever-simmering cauldron of possibility, recipes for cultivating life with meaning are skillfully crafted for those eager to bring more life to their life. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today someone who's going to share herbalism of place, the medicine of knowing where you are, our guest, Eagle Song Gardener. Eagle Song, thank you for joining us here on the program.
Hey, thanks, Daniel. It's great to be back.
You bet. Now, let's talk about herbalism itself. It seems to me that when you hear people talk about it in general, that there's a real separation as though that's something that I can use rather than something I should connect with. Do you find that happens quite a bit when you're out there and you're talking and answering questions, things like that?
Yeah, there is that separation, and part of it comes from different approaches to our lives, different approaches to plants in our lives. One way is that we think that, that this will be good for us, it will cure us or fix us or do something to change our state of being, which they can. But also there's that place of approaching plants more from what can we learn from each other and how do we enrich one another's lives. So these different approaches, one of them is really an invitation to connection, to curiosity and enchantment, if you will. And the other one is more of a, I don't know, I might call it a service-oriented, like what are we going to get out of this? What's it good for? All things which are important, but without that other part of really coming to a plant or even another person with the curiosity about who they are and what they're doing here in this world, changes the way that we have our relationship with them.
Now, how did you get started with the interest in this? Now, it's really fascinating when people come to understand what it is that you do. When we talk about it's a relationship that seems to have a symbiosis, if you will, rather than a separation. Let's kind of get an idea what that means exactly.
Oh, that's a great way of thinking of it, Daniel. It is a symbiosis. It is that the interplay between ourselves and our world, and plants are what I would see as, in a way, the intercessor. By eating the plants, we then have, they come into us, they guide us, they tell us. So in my early childhood, I grew up in a household where my brother had polio, and my mom was pretty well over, she reached the end of her limit more than once, and her directive for me was go outside and play. And I've taken it as a motto for my life, to go outside and just really let nature, to be engaged in nature really did change my life. So I started at an early age and really have continued on with going outside to play. And as we get older, our play changes. We can playfully engage and learn incredible amounts of information at the same time as we develop as mature, as our humanness matures in us. And so that's really the start for me, was go outside and play, and from there everything grew.
Now, speaking of growing, it's pretty fascinating when people can actually begin to, I guess, not just simply understand, but embrace when you think of, let's say, the wise woman's way of herbalism, if you will. And I go back to the time I remember when I became interested in the writings of Carlos Castaneda and his teachings of Don Juan. And especially that very specific title right there as they go out to, I guess, harvest the mescalito, if you will, as it was called. And when I was reading this is back in my early 20s, I was really fascinated by the way they personified the particular mescalito plant itself. And how I remember it was, as they were collecting the buttons, Don Juan was saying, you will carry this burlap sack that will have these buttons in them that you've harvested. And it's going to feel like the weight of the world is inside of this sack. But as you begin to get to a point where you cross this particular invisible barrier which separates this valley from the rest of the world, if you will, that you will cross by, and all of a sudden the sack will become so light it's though you're carrying nothing at all. And he seemed confused by that. He says, so why is this so that I'm going to feel this weight of the world at one point, but by the time I cross this barrier, if you will, that it's going to become lighter? And he simply says, because it's mescalito trying to reach back to the earth and get itself established again. In other words, it's not allowing you to take it away. But once you get to that point, it finally realizes it's crossed the barrier, sort of its rite of passage, and now it's allowing you to take it. And I thought to myself, you know, it was really enjoyable to read that, and there were other things I was reading at the time, and I started thinking to myself, how was it when you look back at indigenous cultures over the centuries, how they were able to pinpoint so accurately the kinds of things they needed in nature that would help to heal people in the village, to help them to thrive? What was it they were doing? Because they certainly didn't have tools, biochemistry, the education that a lot of people may have in botany, things like that, to be able to come to learn these things. And so what came to me was that somehow, perhaps maybe the plants dreamed themselves into the reality with communication and answer in such a way that this, let's say, shaman, if you will, came to say, I could pinpoint accurately exactly what that is because I was called to it. Would that be a way to kind of wrap up what the wise woman's way is when it comes to something like herbs?
Wow, yeah, a lot. And I really appreciate that that image of the burden of carrying the plant, and when it changes, when you cross to a different world, it's really that different approach where you and the plant find symbiosis, where you're not taking it away from its home, you're actually bringing the people to the home of the plant and waking up. I guess that's the way I'd see it, that the plants have always reached out and touched me. And then I develop a relationship. Probably my strongest one in the current time is with the hawthorn tree, which we've talked of before. And the hawthorn touched me, and then I apprenticed to that tree. And in the shamanic tradition of all the cultures I've ever studied, the shaman is really about holding the world together, holding the village together. It's not about fixing and curing. It's about reminding, being able to have the vision of how big the world is and then holding the village together. And the plants, in my practice, have guided me in that way. So hawthorn, for me, is the gnarly old hag that holds the world together. And she can be severe. You know, she's a thorny old woman, and she can be incredibly, well, I wouldn't call her gentle, but definitely wise. And that sense of the ingestion of hawthorn really does change the physical body. It improves the strength of the heart. It helps to open the veins in the body. And really, those are a lot of the things that we need in our world right now. That heart that has a home for courage, the heart that really understands compassion. And so the burden of going out and harvesting these plants does change when you realize that the that the medicine that they're sharing with us, like they come to us in a dream, they really do come from their world, and they're reaching to us. And right at the moment, I think they're reaching to us so that we can reimagine ourselves in their world. And that will bring each individual person more life by the relationship they build with plants, and different plants call different people. So yeah, I can appreciate that, the story, Daniel, and how it's been over the years that the plants have been tapping on our shoulders, and how some of us have turned towards them and taken them in that approach, that this is really the medicine for the world, the medicine for the individual at the same time.
Now, here's one particular herb that I think probably has, let's just say, the most abuse, and it's probably the most misunderstood, but as children, we're drawn to it when we see it, and that's the dandelion. We love plucking this thing, the little white bowl, and you blow on it, and that's, we're shown to do this, but in the meantime, as you get older, we realize we're at war with this weed that seems to be infesting our perfectly cropped lawn. And it was funny because we had a woman on the program who has one of these biosustainable farms in which people from around the world can actually come and stay with her. And for, let's say, room and board, if you will, that you actually help on the farm doing various tasks, but at the same time you're also there to learn, so it's an education at the same time, and biodynamic farming, if you will. And she actually talked about the dandelion, and she said the same thing. She says this is not only one of the most misunderstood herbs or plants, if you will, but probably the most abused. And she says, this is something that actually helps replenish in the earth calcium. So if you find an abundance of these things, like let's say in your yard, they're trying to replace calcium back into the soil. In other words, these guys are doing a good job. And you think of, how people will go out and spend, I don't know, God knows how much money each year on Roundup to just go out there and assassinate these things as though they're, in a war in Vietnam, for instance. And you come to realize, well, not only do they do that, but there's so much more. For instance, I came to understand that if you were able to use this, for instance, you can actually eat these things, and they're good for cleansing the liver and the blood and all these things. And I was like, really? Well, so in other words, I've got a whole bunch of food out there in my yard if you want to look at it that way. But let's talk about that one a little bit if you understand that one.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because it's totally about the approach and how we come to these plants in our world and in our gardens and in the wild. And the idea of foraging my own garden in my own backyard, my brother says not to use the word yard because it's a place where you park trucks. And I actually appreciate that really this is the garden. Everywhere around us is a garden we've been given to live in. And the way we see it, the way we think about that garden has a lot to do with the way we interact in the garden. And so this whole idea with dandelions is really relatively new. It didn't start till after World War II, and it did come about a lot because of the idea of lawn, which was also, it wasn't a new idea, but it certainly wasn't everybody had one idea before then. And so dandelion's a great example of a plant that it's now what we're learning with biochemistry and all of the things that science has offered us, because science does help us open windows that we couldn't see before with new tools and new ways of thinking, new ways of seeing, really, that everything is right there to begin with. The dandelion doesn't really do anything, but it kicks into action what's already there. So as the ground compacts, this little floating seed comes flying by and settles down, and then the wind blows that little umbrella parachute type part of the seed, and as it blows it back and forth, the seed actually wiggles down into the soil and gets itself tucked in, if you will. And as soon as water hits that seed begins its quickening and awakening, and it drives that root deep into the soil, and it is one of the most nutrient-rich plants that we can have in our world and in our everyday lives. Super abundant. And so the root goes down and opens the soil, and the root hairs go out, and there's a whole biological process that happens at the end of those root hairs where the earth and the plant are communicating. And through photosynthesis, the plant can offer the soil organisms carbohydrates that they can't get any other way. So there's this amazing exchange going on between hair roots of plants, all plants, and the earth around them. And so they basically set up this amazing exchange, again, symbiosis. So the better connected the plants are into the earth, the better connected their ability to uptake resources and nutrients. And calcium is an awesome nutrient. I'm glad you mentioned it, because the calcium is what I call the handshaking mineral. Calcium goes out, and it's really important in cation exchange, where the electrons switch back and forth. So we've got chemistry and biology and electricity all going on down there in the earth. With or without us, all that happens. And so this amazing dance is going on. And as I've learned, because the question to begin with as an herbalist was, what's it good for? Which meant, what disease does it change in the body?
Yeah, how does it serve, or how is it useful to me? And and the question should be, but how are you useful to this? And anybody who may have even just peered at the book, The Secret Life of Plants, would understand exactly what we're talking about here.
And it's that reversal, and that's when the burden changes. Then it's not heavy. Then it's like, oh my word, this is amazing. It makes my curiosity is quickened. I just want to get out there and learn more. So what is the plant good for has increased in my understanding of, well, what's it doing there if I wasn't involved? What does that plant do in the world, whatever plant it is? And then I could see, oh, wow, it connects the dandelion, the pollinators come, and the earth is opened up so water and air get into the soil so that the soil thrives, and all those little microbiota down under the soil that really need water and air to succeed, that root just helps open up the soil for them. And she's a tough, good-rooted plant, so she breaks open hard soil. So I consider the dandelion a plow.
Not only hard soil, but you'll also find this thing broken through sidewalks and cracks. I mean, you talk about a diverse thing that this thing is. And the other thing that's beautiful about it, too, is that there's a point that, and if people pay attention, I'm sure they know this, that the dandelion sprouts a yellow flower. Now, let's take a look at what that brings. And I had a lot of these in the backyard, and as I came to understand what the dandelion was, I started just leaving them alone, and I was looking at wonder at the sizes, the way they capture water in the morning, because it looks like spider webs over the top, but it's actually them, and that's something like almost like a little web they have that captures the little dewdrops in the morning, and then in the afternoon as they began to warm up, then all of a sudden you began to see bees. And I don't know about you, but I could sit and watch bees foraging around and bumblebees all day long because of the interplay and the dance they do when they're on top of a flower. So
now you've left learning and you've entered enchantment. It's that place where our mind just takes us to a place where we are so engrossed in what our eyes are seeing that we become enchanted with nature. And then all of a sudden, you're not thinking about how to kill those dandelions. You actually want to know more about them, and by watching and observing and interacting with them, then your life starts to take on that same nature of the dandelion. When you start eating them, it breaks open the hard earth in you. It breaks open parts of you that really are longing for light and moisture. And so there's that nutrient density for sure, but there's also the aspect of the nature of the plant that enters into us. And the yellow color, of course, is the solar plexus. It helps to really allow us to engage in the world with more courage and more forthrightness. And so dandelion, and the easiest way I found to get it in my diet is in the spring when they're just coming up, Daniel. If you go out with a shovel and you dig the roots, I usually cut the tops off and then dig the root out, and then wash the roots, and then chop the whole plant, roots, leaves, buds. If you have a flower or two, that's great. Chop those all up, put them into a quart jar, fill the quart jar just not densely tight, but a good pack, and then pour vinegar, apple cider vinegar over that. Now you can take that dandelion, what I call dandelion pickle. You've got the whole plant, everything in there. And wholeness is another part of the Wise Woman perspective, is that we are looking for the wholeness, the whole plant, not isolating constituents or taking parts out of it, but really using the wholeness of what it is. And that pickle then goes into all of my soups and stews, anything I'm cooking that really would benefit from that sour, a little tiny bit bitter, but not much, but the sour taste really adds an amazing, it's like I call it the secret sauce. Everyone knows it tastes better when we put it in, but no one can put their finger on what it was. So it's a way you can bring that nutrient density into your life. And with calcium, you're much more likely to reach out and engage life than to shut down, because the calcium is the handshaker mineral. It helps to build the nervous system, strengthens the nerves and the digestive part of the body. So, yeah, it's all of it. It's just an amazing, enchanted world we live in.
You know, just last night I was talking with someone, and we were talking about how you see more commonly, for instance, in restaurants, people coming out with their food allergies. All of a sudden now there seems to be somebody out there who is gluten intolerant, lactose intolerant. Sometimes people, I remember would bring in whole sheets of paper that it seemed like with a chemical breakdown of what they can't have in their food.
Oh,
and
how awful.
I had a friend of mine who's in the business serving, and she says, there are times that I simply say, and I know this sounds harsh, but I thought it was rather funny, that people will come in, well, I can't have this, 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 and this. And she says, well, how about if you just open your mouth and the next thing you put it in it is a gun? And I thought that was kind of extreme, but it was funny at the same time that people will come out with their burdens and expect somebody to take them on and please them. It's like, why don't you just stay at home? Don't go out to dinner, right? But I was explaining to this person, I said, it's funny with people with all these food allergies, and they don't realize that really one of the best ways to relieve food allergies is to begin to rebuild the gut biogenome. Now, he kind of sat there with this funny look like, well, what does that mean? And I said, most, if not all, food allergies come from the result of the fact that you have depleted a lot of your probiotics within your gut and your intestinal lining. And he's like, well, what does that mean? And I said, well, within the area of your digestive system, there is a tremendous amount of what we could call friendly bacteria that not only are in there to basically decipher what is it that you put into me, but to break it down and communicate with the rest of your body and which way and how to use this in a very positive way. And when it gets to a point that, let's say you've had an infection, and our doctors love to prescribe antibiotics, and we think of that as a good thing because it gets in there and it cleanses the bacteria, that what you're really doing is you're breaking down that probiotic and prebiotic arena of things going on. Yeah, sure, you're cleaning your system out, but what you're doing is opening yourself up to...
But let's remember, Daniel,
yeah, go ahead.
Cleaning leads to trashing. When we really get it, that cleaning is not a natural phenomenon in the world. It's a totally made-up thing. And so we adopt a different way of looking at the world, not so much that we need to clean our body out, because if it was that dirty, you wouldn't be here anyway.
Right.
And to realize that all that microbiota, and it's just like you said, they're all in there, they all have a purpose. And now with electron microscopes and lots of amazing ways of looking at what's going on in there, But first we had to change our way of thinking, our approach. The approach isn't there's an enemy and we're going to kill it. The approach is there are a lot of interesting and complex life forms all over us and all within us. And we're going to learn how to shake hands so that we can actually work together. Different approach in what we come to. And you're right, all those sensitivities that people have are often caused by everything they've done to themselves in the name of cleansing. So I don't use the word cleansing. I live in the world of nourishing. We're really looking about offering to the body, the organism, the nutrients that build a better, stronger, healthier body. And whole, healthy, wholeness, holiness, they all come from the same word, whole. So what we want to think about is how do we not break things apart, but how do we bring the whole back alive? And the best way I know to do that is to use whole food, whole herbs when we work with herbs. As an herbalist, it's not my business to break the plant apart. It's my business to be the intercessor between the plant and the person, and to maintain the wholeness and the integrity of both the plant and the person in the relationship.
You know, and because I live in the Pacific Northwest, specifically Portland, Oregon, let's talk about a particular weed or herb that has really gained a lot of notoriety. Now, at first it had a bad rap, but now everybody seems to not only be a championing expert for it, but all of a sudden this seems to be the miracle cure on planet Earth, and that is marijuana or cannabis. I get a kick out of the kind of things I'm hearing people say, about this particular thing, and maybe a lot of it's true, but, now you're hearing more champions out there, more than you are people that are out there saying, well, I'm on the side of DuPont and Roundup, let's go out after this thing.
That is not one of my medicines, cannabis, and I have not ever really created a symbiosis. But the thing that I am interested in right at the moment is that, so I'm not going to be able to speak from...
No, and I'm not encouraging. I'm just saying that's kind of one of those things where we have decided it's this, but now all of a sudden, now it's become that.
Again, science has helped us to realize that there is actually an entire system in the body, which is called the cannabinoid system, that is directly able to connect with marijuana, and it does amazing things in the body. And so it's this continued learning that we have and seeing that plant as, talk about a plant that what's it good for. You could go on for days and not even touch what it's good for in the human interface, but the fact that the plant has so many benefits to the environment where it grows, and it's a plant offering itself to us, if you will, for all the different purposes that we might want to engage, not just taking it to cure or fix something, but to create paper, to create fiber for ropes and different things. It's like that plant has so much to offer. And again, our brains have been taught that it's an evil thing. And just like the dandelion, somebody benefited from that story, and it made the plant into a bad guy. And so once again, if we take a step back and say, okay, what is this plant doing here, and what's the nature of the plant, and how is it that it might be reaching out to us to offer us something that would be useful in this time? So, yeah, that's about all I can say about
And that's
cannabis.
fine, because I really wasn't going to hit on that. It just sort of came up, and I thought to myself, wait a minute, here's a weed that had an extreme amount of prejudice that was actually, from what I understand, created by one single guy back in the 1930s. And he went on, and here's the amazing story about this, if it's true, because I came across this, I think it was earlier this year as I'm flipping around the channels. So he decided to champion the fact that this is an evil thing that shouldn't be out there because it alters the way people perceive the world, whatever it is, their behavior.
Yeah.
Then he decided, okay, now that I've done this, now I've got to create a job for myself. And he was actually, from my understanding, people say Nixon was the first, but it was actually this guy who was the one that started the war on drugs, all from marijuana. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, this isn't a drug, this is just a weed, you know. But anyway, so that was that, and it just kind of came up, and it really wasn't one I was going to talk about in the first place, but somehow when we were talking with this, it came up, and I thought, here would be an interesting one, because this is a weed now that has found itself drifting into an arena of a multi-million-dollar, highly politicized arena of human consciousness.
And again,
I mean, we're talking at Elvis Presley levels.
When they break the plant apart and they take it out of its wholeness, that's when all of the craziness begins to get spiraling around. If you were just able to grow marijuana in your backyard like you grow a tomato plant, and have that relationship with that plant in the same way you had with the tomato, that you used it in wholeness, again, the integrity of the plant, the integrity of the person, and recognizing symbiosis in a whole way. As soon as we start breaking plants apart and using only parts of them and concentrating those parts, we create drugs. And actually, I'm an herbalist, not a druggist.
Right.
So that's a big thing for people to understand, that if you're looking to herbs, then really what you want is the closest to the natural form as possible, because that's the place that you're going to find that integrity and wholeness.
Now, the next one I was going to touch on after dandelion, okay? And
okay, good.
I
we
really
had a little sidetrack.
No, we did, but you see how we can take a look at one thing, and it was one, and now all of a sudden it becomes, you know, like I said, the Elvis Presley of the world all of a sudden. Everybody wants it. You know, the government's like, okay, we're onto something here. We found a more useful way to be useful to the world. The government, you know, being useful is an oxymoron. But anyway, this next one.
Now that you've said that, I'm actually going to step in there, and what we're looking for in our world today is self-regulation, right?
Sure.
We want to be regulated from the core of who we are. And so, yes, we do need, in civil culture, we need to have governing, bodies that actually are looking out for the well-being of people. So it's again, we can't create any bad guys, because then all of a sudden we've got ourselves in that divided world. What we want is to cultivate the world of wholeness and to really engage. And I think really maybe the worst thing that plants have ever done to me is they've grown in me that idea that we are looking at wholeness all the time. And that means being able to actually live in a world with different ideas, different ways of being, different ways of praying, and actually just having tolerance. This whole idea of food intolerance, in a way, just is a magnification of our intolerance of everything. But on the underlying place, the intolerance of life itself.
Right,
So,
or another way you could put it, too, is to simply say with the, let's say, food intolerances, we have found ourselves more separated from the world that we live in. Would that be another way to look at it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we've created multi-million-dollar industries to continue to promote the idea that intolerance is a way. It is an approach, and it does make a lot of money. Tolerance is really about looking and being observant and noticing what's going on, and really looking at what's going on in your own body. Like when you eat a dandelion over a period of time and you start to take the energy of that plant into yourself, and you start to notice the little subtle things that start changing in your body, and then the little subtle things that start changing in your mind. So I would say the plants are this is one of my theories, is that the two things that change the fastest on our planet are microorganisms and weeds. Their job is to go in and create life. You know, the weeds come in, they live fast, they die young, they make lots of seeds that helps to promote the regenerative quality of life itself, of the garden, if you will. And so it's the same with the microbes. They live, some of them, a mere 20 minutes. They're so fast at adapting, they can actually invent a way to block an antibiotic before it's even been invented. That's how quick microbes are working. So my idea for being healthy is to eat as many weeds as I can and get as much living food in the form of fermented food into my life, because that puts me closer and closer to the fastest adapters, which in herbalism the word they love is adaptogens. And if we look at the adaptogens, what they do is they just bring more vitality to the organism that's eating them, so that body can adapt and change to the changes in the environment. And you can call it climate change or anything you want, but there is no doubt that things are changing fast in our world. And by becoming allies, that means something that really strengthens us but doesn't create dependence. Ally with the weeds, ally with those microbes in fermented foods, yogurts, sauerkrauts, kimchi, all of it. You're taking in the very life forms that have the best ability to adapt to change. And to me, right at the moment, that's probably the most important thing we can do. And it's a ton of fun.
Yeah, it really is. And before I get to this next one, I kind of want to add to what you had just said. There was a woman on YouTube I came across about 2 weeks ago, and she was a lot of fun to listen to. And a young woman, probably in her late 20s, and I think she has studied naturopathic medicine, but I don't know whether or not she was a doctor. But she simply said this: if you really want to reverse and cure pretty much all diseases, and it's kind of a bold statement, I don't know that she was guaranteeing it, but she was pretty much saying, the body is made up of biochemistry interactions. And she says the very first thing you could do that really would prevent and really reverse pretty much anything you can think of is that you get that biogenome in your gut balanced again, just like what you're talking about with fermented foods and getting back to whole food consumption and understanding, that holistic way. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is in Portland also we have this gentleman who's produced a series of very small, you can read them in an hour to 2 hour books called The Kitchen Sink Farmer. And this was a guy that committed himself, really to understanding a lot of this stuff. And he got to a point that he brews his own kombucha to the point that now it's become a small industry. So he actually now sells to stores. And kombucha, I remember when I first heard that term probably 3 years ago. I'm going to guess. I'm like, oh, this is one of them Portland ridiculous things, kombucha tea. You can get that here, And the first thing I thought of was tea, because kombucha tea. As somehow it really, I swear this honestly happened, Eagle Song, it sort of crept into my consciousness, and I became to realize what kombucha actually was. I was like, oh my goodness, because my wife always talked about, since we've been together, you need to get your probiotics in your body. I'd never even heard of this before, and we've been together 14 years, and it took me all these years before I finally started going, oh, that's what probiotics were for, Now, I brew my own kombucha tea, and not only is it fun, but it brews fast. And you see this thing called a SCOBY, and you realize here is this live bioorganism that converts black or green tea and sugar mixture, and water that you brew, and you put this thing in there, and this thing starts feeding on this. And, I mean, you actually watch it in action as you have the yeast dropping to the bottom of the bucket, and it's just doing it. And these things grow. They're like that really weird round thing. If anybody remembers the Star Trek episode where Spock gets this weird round jelly-like thing slapped on his back, that's what these things look like. But each time I brew this tea, and believe me, you start brewing large quantities of it because that's how fast these things grow, and you realize how fascinating the biochemistry reaction of what's going on of something that is alive, that's growing like a sea monkey, but much more gargantuan. and what it does for you, and how I've started to put this into my green smoothies and the taste of it and so forth. And see, now I'm getting sidetracked, but what I wanted to get at with the kitchen sink farmer thing was that he talked about in his book something real basic that we should all come to understand, and that is the world of bacteria. Now, here's the thing, he says. Bacteria has been around in the universe for billions of years. And the only way that it's going to be successful is by being able to nurture and grow in a way that's positive for itself. Over billions of years, this bacteria has learned how to successfully do that. Right. Now, certainly we hear about the war on cancer, for instance. Now, cancer can be considered a bacteria. However, that particular bacteria isn't very successful because it takes over a host and it kills it. And he says, think about bacteria that really thrives. It's intelligent, as you said earlier. It knows how to actually anticipate an antibiotic even before it's created. So this is something that's saying, I want my host to not only live, but I want it to thrive. Because when it does, so do I. And you're going to try to tell me mankind with its science and its, a couple of million years at best, is going to be able to outsmart something like this? I don't think so. But that's what he talks about in these simple books, and it was amazing to read.
It's because we now know that it is not a world where the survival of the fittest is now old news. It's survival of the best connected networks. And so if we think of our body as a symbiosis, a network of many, many, many life forms, that we aren't at all what we thought we were 10 years ago. I could say the new science, but the new science and the oldest traditions of humanity are so in alignment with one another that we're beginning to really see ourselves as human beings in an entirely different light, and we're beginning to realize that there are so many stories, and what's the story that we're really going to make it, to take our species and the planet hurtling through space, the only blue and green planet hurtling through space, to take us forward is to really think about how do we create these networks. And the microbiology, that's their specialty. The fungi that go in the soil through the tree roots and in between trees, these are communication systems. And the better we learn about those communication systems and employ them in our own activities, in our own way of relating to our neighbors in the neighborhood, to our own physical body, the better off we're going to be to adapt to the changes that are happening. And it's all nature. So I'm going to put my action in harmony with nature, in the sense that like you say, she's been around for a long time, and so staying close to source and really looking at how we can create those vibrant, whole, healthy networks of communication and between species and between each other is, I think, the key to the future. It's actually the key to the moment, because as soon as that starts happening in your life, all of a sudden more life comes to your life.
And that's not only well put, but I completely agree with what you're saying there. And, it's really fascinating when you make that connection in a world that becomes very fascinating. Not only just mysterious, but fascinating. So that finally brings me to the next herb or weed that I wanted to bring up. And I'll tell you, this was probably about 3 or 4 years ago. 3 years ago, I want to guess. I was having some stomach pain, and inflammation. I was trying to figure out what to do about this. Now, there's been another guest we've had on our program a couple of times, someone by the name of Susan Weed. Does that name ring a bell?
I know Susan.
Okay, I figured you did. But anyway, there was a book that was around in my bedroom, and it was actually titled The Wise Woman's Way. And she talks exactly about what we're talking about here, where you can come to see the component of what, let's say, the dandelion can do for you, or you can go deeper and you can not only come to embrace its story, but you can also, as you were just talking about, begin to open the line of communication so that the two of you can understand each other in the world and what your place is. Now, the particular one she brought up, I started looking at this like, yeah, come to think about it, I do see this one around. You think you see the dandelion one around. If you're in urban sprawls, you will see this thing everywhere, and that is the chickweed. And as I got to actually look to see if I was identifying the right one in the yard, I had to go to the store, and on the way to the store, as I'm walking on the concrete and under the bridges that, the freeway overpass and so forth, I was trying to identify this thing, and I started really noticing the kinds of grasses and weeds and things like that, if you will. Nettles, that's another one that I started seeing around. And I got so fascinated and engrossed with finding out whether I could identify this thing somewhat accurately. But before I knew it, I was at the store, and the store was actually almost 7 blocks away. So that's like a 10-minute walk. Mm-hmm. But it was like I was from my house to the store, and I lost time on the way. And it wasn't like I stopped moving either, but I was just there all of a sudden, like the transporter in Star Trek. But now let's talk about the chickweed, because as I looked it up on YouTube, I realized, man, not only is this thing everywhere, especially like in gravel driveways, things like that, but let's talk about that particular herb.
Well, chickweed's a wonderful herb, and like you say, it is abundantly available. And I appreciate that it really just foraging. One of the fun parts of foraging is it really helps us to sharpen our eye. We really start to pay attention to things that are right before us when we start going out to forage. And, there's nothing like the imminent threat of death. If you get the wrong thing, it's going to kill you. So that's a nice little juxtaposition for this foraging that helps us really learn to pay attention to what we're doing and what we're looking at. So chickweed, I love chickweed because that's a plant that's available in the cooler months of the year. A plant that really shows herself well in the spring and the fall, and if you're in the Northwest, even through the winter. So a plant that's rich in saponins, and the saponins are constituents in plants that actually help to emulsify and dissolve things in the body so that they're easily passed through. And on top of that, it's also an incredibly nourishing herb. So how did it help your stomach? Did you actually find a way that your stomach was improved by
No,
by
I actually, that's one of those areas, I wasn't completely certain even though I was, but what I've seen commonly, especially as I was looking it up on YouTube, and it wasn't really a hard plant to identify. Like I said, you can find it in gravel driveways, you can find it off to the side of the road. It's a plant that has like a long line with double leaves, one on each side, and it's kind of matty, like a mat kind of a thing.
Real close to the
but
ground.
I did pick it and I'd taste it. I was like, this stuff doesn't taste too bad. It sort of had a nice minty yet tart citrus flavor. But I didn't follow through with it, but I think that and I should, but the fact is I just, you kind of want to be sure, as you talked about, what's the possibility of grabbing something that may not be so good for you, that you might, that sort of thing. But what I was finding fairly consistently, at least on YouTube anyway, and you got to be careful there because everybody seems to be an expert on YouTube. But I guess if it's on the internet and on TV, then it must be true. At least that's everybody's approach. But
there's just
the
nothing
thing
like
is,
shaking hands
they
with
were
a
saying
real
that,
plant.
yeah, they were saying that pretty much any version of chickweed, no matter what the species, is really, not harmful at all. That it's all good, but just some are better than others, I guess. So, that's why I was kind of, had a very trepid step about whether or not I wanted to grab what I seen right in front of me. I just wanted to be sure.
And
but they were saying, don't worry about it.
And that's why I love that we have herbalists, Daniel, because we are naturally oriented to listening to somebody. It's truly an oral tradition. It's passed from person to person. I can't tell you how many people have said to me, well, I've been reading the books and I see all that stuff on the internet, but I still am not convinced that that's the right plant. And so I love that because that means that there's still a place for an herbalist in the world, somebody who's gone ahead on the road, tasted, tried, figured out what's happened, and then can actually say to you, yes, this is chickweed. And when you leave, you feel way more confident that it is chickweed. So there's that human-to-human part of herbalism that I absolutely love. And it's then a triad. It's the person, both the people and the plant. And it's a handing off of information, because once I show plants to people, then they have knowledge. They have information that they can use in their own life. They have the confidence to go out and find it again. And so inspiring one another to engage in this natural world that is all around us and yet so foreign is probably one of the most exciting parts about being an herbalist. It's that place of really helping bring people back home to this planet, which is what our talk's about, herbalism of place. The plants that grow around each of us wherever we are in the world, because no matter where I've been, there are plants around me in the world. The more I know about them, the better I feel about being at home wherever I am, because all my allies they show up everywhere with me. So I love that. I love that people can still teach people, and even with all our science and all of our fancy technology, there's still a place for that grandmother wisdom of transferring information from one person to another through the process of doing something.
Now, I know, as we won't really put a date on this, but there is what is known as the Pacific Women's Herbal Conference that happens. It's pretty much the same time every year, I think around the third week of September. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, great. And I know there's one coming up here, and that's usually in Monroe, Washington. So if people want to find out more about that, let's say they might miss the boat this year, but we know that it's going to be happening. First of all, how long has it been going on, and is there a website that people can find out more about what this is all about?
Right. Yes, it's actually incarnated the first time in the late 1990s, and we ran 4 years then. And then there was a long hiatus, and we're back at it. So this will be our third conference. It does happen the third week of September usually. It could change. But the best way to find out about the conference is to just go to the website pacificwomensherbalconference.com, and pretty much everything's there that you need to know. You can sign up for anybody can sign up for the newsletter, and it is an outreach, because I love that transfer of information from person to person. So it's a small, intimate gathering of women who love plants and want to connect with nature, and it is going to keep going. We're having so much fun, we just can't stop.
And it certainly is a lot of fun, especially when you get out there and you learn about these things, as I've started to, and you engage and realize in this world that we all have more than enough to have a wonderful life and to thrive and to be able to share that with others. But it's a matter of understanding what is your place in the world, and certainly plants that have been around for a millennia plus, and bacteria, as we talked about earlier, are going to show you the way, but all you've got to do is stop, put down that technology, open your ears, your eyes, and your heart, and just simply begin to listen, and that path will make itself available to you, because it has no other choice.
That is so well said, Daniel. That is exactly right.
Well, it's the herbalist
really
passing on to the student here, I think.
Yeah. So that actually the conference is great, because we invite women of all ages. You could be in your mom's arms, or you could be 100, and we still have a place for you. So
there you go.
Because it is this transfer of information, and the women who have gone before us are so important to helping guide us in this time that we're walking through right now. And there is a place for everyone. Remembering our place in the world is probably the most powerful medicine we can have.
I agree. Eagle Song, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure when you're on the program today, weaving stories. And we finally got to that one weed I wanted to talk about, even though marijuana jumped in and took an Elvis Presley status for a minute. But see, hey, everything arranges itself in its own way, and you just listen and go with it. So thank you so much. And one more time, give out that website.
It's pacificwomensherbalconference.com.
Very good.
We'd love to see you there.
Thank
Thanks,
you
Daniel.
so much.
It's always fun.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. Again, one way you can find your place in the world is simply visit us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter so you can stay up to date with things such as the Pacific Women's Herbal Conference. Find out when that's going on so that maybe you can be the one that's sharing stories as well with others to find out how they can also help find their place in the world. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.